Hey everyone, welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into something really fascinating and, frankly, pretty urgent, the science of aloneness. We're going to explore exactly why being by yourself can either feel deeply painful or incredibly rejuvenating. It's something that touches all of us at some point, and understanding the science behind it can completely change how we experience our daily lives.
So here's our roadmap for today. 1. The two faces of aloneness. 2. A global public health crisis. 3. The biology of social pain. 4. The loneliness feedback loop. And finally, 5. Evidence-based solutions.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the two faces of aloneness, where we'll define our terms.
You know, society often gets this whole concept completely wrong, and that misunderstanding causes a ton of unnecessary suffering. Let's look at loneliness first. It's not just a physical state of sitting by yourself in a room. It's actually a subjective distress that pops up when there's a gap between the social connection you have and the connection you actually want. It is entirely involuntary. You crave connection, but you feel isolated. Researchers often call this the pain of aloneness, and man, it hits hard, bringing on feelings of low self-worth and actively triggering anxiety and sadness.
But then we have solitude, and this is the complete opposite in terms of how it feels. Solitude is a totally voluntary, positive state. It's chosen specifically for rest, creativity, or just some good old self-reflection. Psychologists actually refer to this as the glory of aloneness. You can have a vibrant social life, amazing relationships, and still actively crave and really benefit from a good dose of solitude.
When we put these two states head-to-head, the absolute game changer is choice. Loneliness is unwanted isolation that brings on anxiety and drags down your self-worth. Solitude, on the flip side, is chosen isolation that brings peace and actually boosts creative problem-solving. Bottom line, unwanted isolation hurts us, while chosen isolation heals us.
Let's move on to Section 2, a global public health crisis, and look at the actual scope of this problem.
Now that we've separated the pain of loneliness from the peace of solitude, we really need to grasp the sheer scale of this issue. The World Health Organization estimates that roughly 16% of people worldwide experience significant loneliness. Just think about that for a second. That is 1 in 6 people on the planet. This isn't a minor issue. It's a massive global public health concern crossing borders and cultures.
And get this, the data totally shatters what most of us assume. If you're thinking this is just something older folks deal with, check out the demographic breakdown. 30 to 44-year-olds actually report a loneliness rate of nearly 29%. That is almost triple the rate of people 65 and older, who sit at around 10%. Young and middle-aged adults are literally in the thick of this crisis.
And the physical toll? It's severe. Research shows that chronic loneliness pumps up the risk of early death by an astounding 26%. To put that into perspective, public health experts consider this a risk on par with smoking or obesity. Plus, it's tied to a roughly 30% higher risk of coronary heart disease and stroke.
So hearing those numbers naturally brings up a pretty profound and urgent question. Why exactly does feeling disconnected from other people cause such intense physical damage to our bodies? How does a feeling become a heart condition?
Let's find out in Section 3, the biology of social pain. We're going inside the brain.
To understand how an emotional state becomes a physical condition, we have to look at what researchers accurately call social pain. Brain imaging gives us this wild look into the process. When lonely individuals are exposed to thoughts of social rejection, specific regions of their brains literally light up: the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex and the insula. And here's the craziest part. Those are the exact same neural pathways that process a physical injury. Your brain mirrors the feeling of a broken bone when you experience a broken social bond. It totally validates that loneliness is a deeply evolved biological alarm system, definitely not a personal failure.
Because your brain sees isolation as an active physical threat, kind of like an animal separated from the herd, it sets off a chronic physiological stress response. Your body's stress systems kick into overdrive, flooding you with hormones like cortisol. And if that stays turned on, it keeps your blood pressure high and drives up systemic inflammation. Over time, that just wreaks havoc on your immune system and your cardiovascular health.
That brings us to Section 4, the loneliness feedback loop, and how it traps us.
This biological stress response doesn't just quietly damage our internal organs, it radically messes with our psychology and behavior, creating a very real trap. It usually kicks off with step 1, a stressful life event, like a breakup, a move, or a major life transition. That triggers the loneliness, which pushes us into step 2, hypervigilance. Because you're feeling vulnerable, your brain goes on high alert for rejection. That rolls right into step 3, negative social expectations. You just start assuming people don't want you around. And the irony? That drives you to step 4, completely withdrawing from socializing altogether, which, of course, just locks you deeper into the original loneliness.
But how do clinicians fix this loop if people are too ashamed to admit they're stuck in it? Well, they have to get a bit creative and measure it covertly. Researchers rely on validated tools like the UCLA Loneliness Scale, which has a 20-item version and a super quick 3-item screener. There's also the De Jong-Gierveld scale, which is fantastic because it separates social loneliness, missing a broad network, from emotional loneliness, lacking that one deep, intimate attachment. By asking indirect questions, they help people bypass the stigma of just flat-out saying they feel isolated.
All right, our final section, 5, evidence-based solutions and interventions, finding connection.
So how do we actually break the loop and get our social well-being back? The good news is science has some highly effective, actionable answers. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is basically top tier right now. It directly targets and challenges those negative beliefs we saw in the feedback loop, showing a really solid, measurable effect. Then we have group activities, think choirs or fitness classes, that target community building and show moderate evidence for reducing isolation. And for older adults, digital training, basically teaching tech use, provides a proven pathway back to connection with measurable results.
But if there's one huge takeaway from all the research, it's this: multi-component approaches are the absolute best. The gold standard is combining psychological support, like therapy, to dial down that threat vigilance, with practical skill building and community programs. Because honestly, just dropping a lonely person into a crowded room doesn't work at all if they don't have the psychological tools to feel safe connecting.
It's also super fascinating to look at the broader cultural side of things. There's this cultural paradox where heavily individualistic societies, like we see in North America and Western Europe, actually report higher average rates of loneliness than collectivist cultures. We might champion self-reliance and independence, but we often lack the built-in community structures that naturally buffer against isolation.
Ultimately, if we're going to combat this public health crisis, we absolutely have to destigmatize loneliness. And a huge part of that is recognizing that being alone isn't inherently a bad thing. It is perfectly healthy to seek out the peace and self-discovery found in deliberate solitude. As this quote beautifully sums it up, "Solitude is not the absence of others, but a positive, rejuvenating state, the glory of aloneness."
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought to carry with you. How can you shift your perspective today to turn a painful moment of perceived isolation into a deliberate, rejuvenating moment of solitude? The science shows that taking control of your alone time can literally transform your health and your mindset. Thanks so much for learning with us today.